So hello everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. We'll be discussing Shelach Lecha, this week's Parsha, about the Meraglim, the spies that Moshe sent into Israel. Just as a note, I heard this Dvar Torah from Rabbi Bernstein from Machon Yaakov. I thought it was an amazing idea, so I wanted to share it with you. So stay tuned. So the introduction of Shelach Lecha is really quite, it makes sense. We're introducing who the spies are that are going to be sent into Israel. So we start quoting their names, which tribe they're from. Great. And then we're going to be focusing on a comment of Rashi. So towards the end, after we've introduced everybody, it says, Eila Shmot HaAnashim Asher Shalach Moshe LaTorah La'aretz, and here we are, Vayikra Moshe LeHoshea Ben Nun Yehoshua. So we know Yehoshua as Yehoshua, but before his name was actually Hosea. So here Moshe changed his name from Hosea to Yehoshua. Why? Says Rashi, Vayikra Moshe LeHoshea. Now Rashi says, Hitpal olav, Ya Yoshiecha me'etzat meraglim. Moshe prayed for him that God should save you from the counsel of the meraglim. Okay, that makes sense. The only problem is that it doesn't. Now, why? So that's what we're going to be focusing on here. We see a very interesting story in a Gemara in Brachot on 10a, Yud Amud Aleph. It says the following. So one of the students of Rabbi Akiva, his name is Rabbi Meir, there were people in his neighborhood, maybe his neighbors, who were really, really bothering him, who were just causing him untold trouble, and I guess he was fed up, and he actually started to pray for them to die, which we can imagine how horrible his life must have been by them, that he would do such a thing. So Bruria, his wife, actually calls him up. She says, "My Taima, why are you doing this?" And then she quotes a pasuk, a verse from Tehillim, and says, "Are you doing this because the pasuk says Yitamu Chatayim, because the sinners should there should be an end to the sinners?" And then she says, "Why do you think the fact that it says Chatayim, maybe the people you're praying for are Chotim, not Chatayim?" We'll get into what exactly that means later. Point is, Bruria says, "Why don't you pray for them to do tshuva?" So Rabbi Meir listens to her. And he prays for them to do tshuva, and amazingly they do tshuva. Beautiful story. Again, the only problem is, and this is going to turn out to be the same problem in our Rashi, is that's not so nice. Because the Maharsha asks a question based on brachot, later on in actually this same tractate in the Gemara, that says, Hakol bidei shamayim chutz meyirat shamayim. Everything is in the hands of heaven except for fear of heaven. Now, our understanding of fear of heaven is that it represents free will. And Maharsha says, Rabbi Meir, how can you pray for this? After all, you're praying for them to do tshuva. Tshuva is yirat shamayim. You're praying for them to change their free will. Now, as you know, you can pray to God for everything. You can pray, everything after all is in the hands of heaven, except for this one thing. You are praying for the one thing that you can't pray for. What's Rabbi Meir doing? The Maharsha says, parenthetically, this is actually a problem we encounter every day. In the weekday davening, in the Amidah, the fifth bracha, the fifth thing we say is about Harosevi Tshuva, that God should hopefully bring us back into Tshuva. How can we pray for such a thing? That's the one thing we can't pray for. That's up to us. So says Maharsha, that's actually less of a problem, because since we are the ones who are asking God for help in Tshuva, that means that we want to do Tshuva, we're just asking for help. And that's not a problem. After all, we need help. Everyone needs help, even in spiritual matters. So now that we've decided our direction, we can ask God for help. But the key point here is that we've already changed direction. We know which direction we want to. We're just asking God for help. What Rabbi Meir seems to be doing is he's asking them to change direction. You can't do that. If you're already on the path of doing good, then ask for help to do more good. But if you're on the path of doing bad, you can't pray for somebody to now suddenly choose the path of good. That's the one thing you can't pray for. That's what the Gemara is teaching us. So what's happening here? So the E.A. Hayam, quoted by Rav Bernstein, says the following. What exactly does it mean, Yirat Shamayim? What is Yirat Shamayim? Well, what does that include? What does that encompass? So it turns out that free will isn't so simple. As we can imagine, after all, in free will, there are circumstances that bring out certain reactions. And depending on the circumstance, you'll have a different reaction. So what we're saying is, different circumstances bring out different responses by people. that after all, if you were to ask a regular person, would you steal? He would say no, I would not steal. Okay, well, what if we tweak the circumstance a little bit? What if, say, you're hungry? Hopefully, the answer would still be no. Okay, but what if you're very hungry? Now let's say we tweak it a little bit more. Say you're very hungry. This thing that you're looking at smells very good, and the person who owns it is someone you happen to not like very much. Now we have different circumstances. All these things are kind of weighing in on whether or not you should do this action and take what it is you're looking at. So again, will you steal? I don't know. This is actually quoted in Mishle. Shlomo Melech asks God to not make him poor or to make him rich, because each one brings their own circumstance, right? If you're poor, maybe you'll do something to make some more money. If you're rich, maybe you'll think you're above other people. It'll bring up different circumstances. And Shlomo Melech says, I don't want to be tried by those circumstances. So that is really the key to what's happening in this Gemara, in this section of the Talmud, where Rabbi Meir is praying for these people to die, and brutally challenges him. Why do you think they're chataim? Maybe they're chotim. Now what's going on? And there are two types of sinners. There are situational sinners. As you say, maybe they're in a very bad circumstance, and because of their bad circumstance, they make wrong choices. The choices are wrong, but they aren't wrong. Maybe they're good people. They're in a very hard situation. The second case is maybe there's intrinsic sinners. Regardless of the situation you put them in, they'll always do wrong, no matter what. They don't care. Put them in a good situation, they'll make it bad. Bad situation, they'll make it worse. What about those people? So Buri is challenging Rabbi Meir, and he's saying, why do you think that these people are chatoim? Chatoim are people who are intrinsic sinners. Those people, maybe you could pray for them to die, especially if they're making your life so miserable. But chotim, maybe it's just their circumstances. Maybe they're in a bad situation, and that's why they're reacting to you, Rabbi Meir, in such a negative way. Maybe pray for their circumstances to change, and their reactions will change. And that's what Rabbi Meir does. He prays for them. Because this idea keys in to a central idea, that sometimes free will is not so simple. After all, the Gemara doesn't say Hakol bidei shamayim chutz me free will. It says chutz me yirat shamayim. Your actual choice, that's up to you. But all the other determining factors around that free will decision, those can be determined by heaven. Now that's actually what we're seeing in this week's parsha. Because when Moshe says, Vayikra Moshe Yehoshua binun Yehoshua, and Rashi says, and I'm assuming he's actually probably quoting a midrash or a chazal somewhere. It says, Meraglim, that God should save you from the counsel of the spies. How could he pray for such a thing? The Ben Ish Chai asks this question. He says, you're praying for a Yirat Shamayim decision. You can't pray for a Yirat Shamayim. That's not in his hands. So what's going on? So the Ben Ish Chai actually explains, according to the Zohar, that the Zohar says the Meraglim, this was actually a Midot issue about their character. The Meraglim knew that in the Midbar they were Nesiim. They were princes. They were the heads of their tribes. Once they went into Israel, potentially it was a different situation. Maybe they'd be shuffled up and they'd lose their positions of authority. And the thing is, people in positions of authority do not like to lose their positions of authority. So here, going into Israel, there's a serious risk for them. What happens if they go in? They'll lose their positions of kavod, and they don't want to lose their positions of kavod. That was not the same nisayon that Yehoshua had. Why? Because Nisan was going to inherit Moshe. He's the one who's going to take over after Moshe. When he went into Eretz Yisrael, he's the one who's going to lead the Jewish people and build them up in Eretz Yisrael. And the thing is, Yehoshua had good midot. There's a reason why he'd be swept into the council of the spies into their evil situations. Oh, maybe what they're saying is true, and therefore I wouldn't have to take this position of kavod. And after all, since he's Yehoshua, he wants to avoid those positions of authority. He doesn't want to pursue kavod. He wants to run away from it. That's what Moshe was davening for Yehoshua for. That was the key point of Moshe's prayer for Yehoshua. It wasn't a free will decision that he was making, right? Because after all, Yehoshua was the person least in need of prayers. Pray for the other Meraglim, not Yehoshua. But with the other Meraglim, again, it was a free will choice. It was about kavod. It was a midot issue. A midot issue is Yirat Shamayim. You can't pray for people for Yirat Shamayim. But for Yehoshua, it was different because he had good midot. So what was Moshe praying for? He's praying for him to have insight into the situation and what the Meraglim were saying. To see what they're saying intellectually. that what they were saying was false. They were saying something that was not true about Eretz Yisrael. And as long as Yoshua had that clarity, he'd be able to make the right decision. Now notice that Moshe wasn't making a decision, praying for Yoshua to make the right decision. He was praying for clarity on behalf of Yoshua, because after all, when we're all in certain situations, sometimes the position could be more clear, and if something's clear, then we know not to do it. What if the circumstances are more hazy? Now, we're a little more, things are a little more fishy, we're not so sure how to act. So the thing is, the more clarity a situation has, then the more likely it is that hopefully you'll make the right decision. So that's what Moshe was praying for. And clarity, since it's not Yirat Shamayim, is in the hands of heaven. The amount of clarity you have in a situation is in the hands of heaven. That's what Moshe was praying for Yoshua. Not for free will, but for clarity. And that is essential, I guess, Nakuda, essential idea. It's a yesod, a foundational idea in living our lives. Because sometimes we like to think that we're making choices. And our question is, are those choices really bechira? Because I suppose in Jewish thought, bechira really takes up your moral choices. Will you do the right action or the wrong action? When it comes to actual like parnas or the situations we find ourselves in, that is determined in the hands of heaven. Our reactions in those situations, that's determined by us. That's what bechira really is. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day and good Shabbos.